Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome to episode 111 of the Last Round Podcast. No Danny Z today, but we have a returning special guest, Mr. Andy Clarke. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
No problem.
How's Christmas been?
Quiet, which I guess that's probably the same for everybody. You knew what was coming. So yeah, it's just me and my wife didn't see any family or anything like that. I had a Zoom funeral yesterday on Boxing Day. Cousin of mine passed away just before Christmas. Not altogether unexpected, and it was kind of nice actually. You think it's going to be grim. I was prepared for it to be quite brutal, but it wasn't. It was okay. And there's some people on the call who I haven't seen for a while. So yeah, that strangely, although like I said, I thought that might be quite hard work. It wasn't. It was kind of a bit of a highlight actually, odd though it may sound. But yeah, the TV here has been terrible, mate. Like, I think they've just given up on it now that with Netflix and Amazon and stuff like that, and they've not been able to make much new stuff this year. Pretty much everything on BBC was just like from 45 yeyears ago. We're talking Morecambe and Wise and Dad's Army, and this will mean nothing to your US listeners, but for us from the UK, it's a shambles.
That would be kind of funny, get our American listeners, because we're kind of like a 50-50 split to watch a little bit of Dad's Army.
Yeah, it takes some explaining, I think. Yeah. It takes some explaining. But it was probably the best thing on.
It's funny because we actually had somebody at work was asking me the other day, because I work Christmas Day, and they were asking me about, English TV, and they brought up Mr. Bean, and they were like, I just don't get it. They're like, I just don't get how he's funny.
Yeah, I kind of like the first few. I think I enjoyed the first couple, and then you kind of know what's going to happen. They're not like, I don't know, like US audiences aren't maybe massive on physical comedy or whatever. But, it is pretty English, that, isn't it? I think it's pretty English. It's interesting what things really translate, though. Like you look at the US Office. I really like the US Office, and they've made loads of them. Whereas here, I think Ricky Gervais did like 12. And a few specials, but they ran with that in America, and it's really good.
Yeah,
and all of there like dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and it was all good. It was all good. I watched this new film on Netflix the other day, Midnight Sky, with George Clooney, and that came with a big build up, and it wasn't great. When you put something on and you're kind of expecting something, and like Netflix subscription is minimal. It's unbelievable value, but you still feel a bit robbed when something's just a bit shit. And it kind of fit into that category, really.
We kind of got sidetracked there, so kind of turning it back to the boxing. From this weekend, Saturday the 26th, from the Shrine Exposition Center in Los Angeles. It wasn't the main event, but I think we're going to class it as that. We had Juan Macias Montiel, now 22-4-2, KO in the first round over James Kirkland, who falls to 34-3. Kirkland down 3 times in round 1. Think that's the last we'll see of him, Andy?
I hope so. It was a tough watch, that, wasn't it? To be honest, I kind of lost track the last few days, so I didn't even really know that was happening. And then I just saw mention of Kirkland on Twitter today, and I had a look at it, and the referee should have stopped that after the second knockdown, first thing. But he was always a bit of a favourite of mine, Kirkland, actually. I remember I covered his fight 7 years ago against Glenn Tapia, this time of year, roughly, December. He was on the Rigondeaux undercard, Rigondeaux, Joseph Agbeko. And it was a really good fight. It was a really good fight because Tapia was undefeated. He had the same people behind him that Arturo Gatti used to have from Jersey, quite a lot of noise around him. And the idea was for Tapia anyway, that he would win and Kirkland would be an amazing name to get on his record, and he would really go up a few rungs, and Kirkland just battered him over 6 rounds. It was great action. Tapia was really brave, too brave, really, and he got the Canelo fight after that, outdoor at a ballpark in Houston. So kind of a home fight for both, really, when you think about where Kirkland's from and the makeup of the crowd. And he lost, and we thought that was pretty much it. And then he came back. I mean, he's had a mad career, hasn't he? Because there's always been ability there. You see that fight against Angulo, and the one against Tapia. Then he got wiped out in the round by Ishida. Odd fight against Carlos Molina. Always at his best when he was with Ann Wolf, but that was on and off. He was pretty much always in trouble with the law at various intervals. So I just hope that he saved some money, because he's definitely made some. But the fact that he's still taking fights now kind of suggests that he probably hasn't. And that's, we see it a lot, don't we? But it's a bit gutting, because I always really enjoyed watching him, and it was a pretty sorry sight, to be honest, wasn't it?
Paul Smith Jr. put a kind of an interesting tweet on today. I'll just read it to you. Any fighters who have had a long career or a couple of hard fights late in their careers, when contemplating retirement or carrying on for one more fight, have a look at this fight. It's all over. Let it go. This is sad to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think Kirkland he'll have known that it had gone, and that's why I say I guess he must need the money, because sometimes I think fighters kind of discover in the ring that it's gone. Like, I remember watching Scott Quigg against John O'Carroll earlier in the year, and Scott Quigg trained like he always does, got in unbelievable shape, and then on the night it was just one too far. He couldn't really. He could see the punches coming, but he couldn't really get out of the way. He couldn't really pull the trigger. And he knew it was over at the end of that fight. I mean, he has been around the gym since. I think he's finding it a bit tricky to stay away. But Ashley Theophane against Sam Eggington a few weeks ago, same thing. I think Ashley maybe kind of knew that it probably wasn't, but was hoping it might still be there. But I think Kirkland absolutely knew that he was a shell, wasn't he? He was a complete shell, and we just see it again and again, because it's got to be financial. Like, there's no other reason why you would be in the ring if you're him, if it's not that I can think of.
I worry that Oscar De La Hoya keeps talking about coming back, and he keeps telling us that he's going to fight, someone ranked. He wants to fight someone relevant instead of taking, someone around his own age. And this is the thing that I kind of worry will happen to him.
Yeah, what the really easy way for this not to happen is for commissions to refuse to license fighters. Because in the UK, the border control here do a good job with that, because there was talk about Nigel Benn fighting Sakio Bika. And there was talk before that about Nigel Benn fighting Steve Collins, and Steve Collins was talking about fighting Roy Jones and stuff like that. Now, that could never happen here. Well, it could, but it just couldn't happen under the British Boxing Border Control, because they won't give a 50-odd Nigel Benn a license. They won't do it, because they know that he might still be able to punch, probably can still punch, but they don't care about that. It's about punch resistance and the kind of danger that they'd be in. So all this would be solved by commissions just refusing to license fighters and do this. But they continue to do it. They did it with Tyson against Roy Jones, and okay, that went off fine. But the fight that didn't go off fine that night was Jake Paul against the NBA guy whose name escapes me now. I mean, that was a bad knockout, and that was always going to happen at some point when you license complete and utter novices, where you can't be guaranteed that it's any kind of a fair match. I mean, but there's so many different commissions in America and no overarching body that they can't. You'll always find a state that will do it, won't you?
That seems to be the issue. I think in my mind, we'll keep seeing these fights until somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, probably. And you're right. And that's pretty desperate, because, I mean, what can you say about that? I mean, but that's it. Like, the greed involved. With the fighters, I don't think, with De La Hoya, like, it's not about money, but he just wants it, doesn't he? He wants to come back. He wants to do it. Maybe it would give Golden Boy a bit of a push if they need it. Who knows? You know, we don't know the inner workings of the company, but with everybody else around that fight, it's greed. They want to make money off it, and it will take something bad to happen for people to be forced to have a rethink, or to not want to be involved because they'll know that the next one won't make any money.
I think this is a story that will just go on, and we'll be talking about this, several times next year when we see, I know, Jake Paul against Dylan Dennis, Manny Pacquiao against Conor McGregor. Floyd is probably going to have, 2 or 3 more celebrity fights, keep himself relevant. And, when you're driving Bugattis and you've got your own plane, I'm sure that's an expensive, month-to-month living.
Yeah. I mean, he's a genius, Mayweather, isn't he, really? Because when you think about it, to be able to just make an absolute ton of money taking fights that there's no possible way in a million years you can lose, number one. And number two, your opponent has got no chance of probably ever even landing on you clean. Good luck to him. If people are going to throw cash at, he's done it twice now, hasn't he? With McGregor, and he had the one in Japan. Was it Thailand? Or I can't remember, but it didn't get the same publicity, but he still made loads of money off it. And if these people are just going to throw cash at him essentially for doing something that is no more physically challenging for him than getting into his car, then he may as well do it. Anybody would. It's just a lot of other people, I think, will kind of chase that dream still, if you like. Like Glenn McCrory over here, he was saying straight away, as soon as we had that fight between Roy Jones and Tyson, he was saying, I used to be a sparring partner of Mike's, 96 rounds, never down once. He still got the urge there to box. He wanted to get it back on with Johnny Nelson and stuff like that, Evander Holyfield, because some of these guys do need the money, and that, which is terrible, really, when you consider how much they've made and then presumably lost. But some of them do still need the money. And I guess if they can manage to do some kind of round robin where everybody manages to get paid and nobody gets hurt before the public gets sick of it, and kind of mug everybody a bit, I wouldn't really mind. We wouldn't mind, would we? Because we know what they've given. The general sporting public might get a bit irritated by that, but boxing fans wouldn't mind that. I don't think. I mean, I'd it's almost like you're contributing towards their kind of pension fund, essentially. Pay for a pay-per-view you don't really want, but where the money's going, or at least some of it. Yeah,
fingers crossed they all, stay safe and make some money so they can carry on doing it. Or there's only so many like commentary gigs that they can do on the sidelines, and obviously some of them are a little bit punch drunk and they necessarily can't do that. But fingers crossed they all stay safe next year. On that same card, we had David Morrell, now 4-0, KO3 over Mike Gavrilsky, who's 26-4-1. Interesting fight. Obviously, it was supposed to be for the WBA interim title, but David Morrell weighed in, too heavy on weigh-in, so the belt was only up for grabs for Mike Gavrilsky. Looks a good upcoming prospect. Do you recognize him from the amateur scene, Andy?
Yeah, I don't really know much about him, but I did read that he was, he's young, isn't he? He's 20, 21, something like that. Mm-hmm. And he had nearly 200 amateur fights and apparently represented Cuba, like the senior national team, on numerous occasions. I never saw him. And I've watched that Cuba national team, pretty much everything they've done, really, for the last 5 years. And, at middleweight, they've had Arlen Lopez at 75 kilograms, and then at 81, they've had Julio La Cruz. And those two have been absolute fixtures from London all the way through to Rio and beyond. So I don't doubt that he's got that kind of national team, I think the setup there, the experience. But what I do find when, and this is slightly off the subject, but what I do find when fighters come through is that people are very happy to take their amateur record as given by the fighter. And you see it on Wikipedia a lot as well. And I'll see it often with fighters I cover. They'll describe themselves as, ABA champion. And I'll look into it and I'll see that didn't happen. They didn't win the senior elite ABA title. Now, they may have won a Northwest one or a London one or whatever it is. And I haven't got a problem with that, because you can describe it however you want to describe it. But everybody just runs with it and accepts it and takes it. And I don't. I check things, which seems to be something that people don't really do anymore. But yeah, I saw his amateur record and I just thought, wow, that's interesting because I mean, I just don't. I don't know him from the amateurs at all. But they do box a lot of international competitions. So anyway, he's turned pro now, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he goes. I mean, that division's kind of, he's super middleweight, isn't he?
Yeah, 168. Yeah.
Yeah, so that division's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Canelo's looking to clear up the rest of those titles as quick as he can, and then vacate them all. Probably, I'd have thought. So if he keeps ticking over next year, very very early, then there's going to be belts flying around unless someone can beat Alvarez, and I don't see that.
He looks good. He looks a lot more positive, a lot more attack-minded compared to a lot of, obviously, the regular Cubans like Rigondeaux and, Luis Ortiz. So I think he's going to be a fan favorite. Obviously he missed weight at 168 and they already kind of talked about him eventually moving up to 175. So, hopefully that was just, one of those weeks, maybe due to the coronavirus, he couldn't, train properly and, get down to 168 because I think he was 2 or 3 pounds over, because he's still young. So maybe, moving up to 175 is obviously going to be in the future.
Yeah, you'd have thought he will. Yeah, you'd have thought he will because, as you say, you don't really know the reasons why he missed it. It could be a few different things, and it's not a particularly big deal. But he should probably try and stay at 168 as long as he can, because it's quite a big jump, that half a stone. And I think both of those divisions, though, are going to be interesting over the next 2 or 3 years, because I don't think Beterbiev's going to hang around forever. I mean, I think he's over 35 now. I think he's like 35, 36. Gavrilsky retired, didn't he? And there's definite possibilities, but we just don't know yet really how good he is. But I mean, it's good to hear that he's more kind of aggressive than Cuban fighters can tend to be, because that has been their downfall to an extent. Purists love watching them, but often they've struggled to translate that into being big stars, because as great as Rigondeaux is and brilliant to watch as he is, if you really like top draw boxing technique, he can be a bit frustrating because he just does it his way, and no amount of encouragement for him to do it any other way was never going to work.
That's true. It's true. Very negative style, but they kind of dominate the amateur scene, or did dominate the amateur scene. And obviously, turning pro now, a lot of the Cubans and especially the Eastern Europeans are kind of taking over the pro scene. With Lomachenko, Usyk, Glavognik, Beterbiev. It can be kind of funny if they actually kind of gave them all a push, because they just turned pro with so much experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happened in recent years, basically, is that, I mean, back in 25, 30 years ago, you did have the odd Kazakh who would turn pro, like fighters like Vasily Girov. But they were still fairly few and far between until Golovkin came along. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is 1990, obviously all of those member states then had to set up their own boxing federations. I mean, that Soviet team, how anyone ever beat them, I just think, looking at it now, I just don't know, because you look at the amount of teams that have come out of it who were top draws. Russia's still, obviously, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, as you mentioned, particularly in recent years. But Azerbaijan are very strong, so are Armenia, Georgia have been in the past, Turkmenistan are pretty handy, Tajikistan have got the odd good fighter they throw in. There's just so many, and the last kind of big former Soviet nation to really now start to go pro is Uzbekistan. And we're going to talk about prospects of the year a little bit later, but basically I'm going to shove your way like 7 or 8 Uzbeks who all turn pro after Rio or after the Hamburg 2017 World Championships, and loads of names will be familiar. Melikuziev, who's fighting Kovalev at the end of January, Murodjon Akhmadaliev, who's already a unified champion, Israel Madrimov, Shakram Giasov, Hassanboy Dusmatov, who was a gold medalist who took his time turning pro. He's come over now. There are 3 or 4 more as well. and they've all got under 10 fights, and they're all undefeated apart from Vasilin Nazarov. And they're all going to fight for world titles, I'm convinced of it, within the next 2 or 3 years. And more than a good number of them will win them too. And that kind of prevailing wind from the East, kind of led by Ukraine more recently, it's not going to blow out anytime soon. It's really not, because I've been over there to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And when you go and watch them train, but there's nothing wrong with the facilities, and boxing gyms the world over are pretty much the same. But the passion for the sport is huge. I remember going to the Kazakh Academy, and it was just like watching a load of little Golovkins. And the desire and the hunger to make it is massive. It's absolutely massive. And you talk about that now with regard to other countries. Is it quite as succeed at all costs as maybe it used to be? I don't know, but it is there, because they lead hard lives. They really do. And boxing is their way out. So they're coming. Like the Uzbeks are coming big time over the next couple of years. And they'll be good to watch too, though. So long as people support them and get behind them, and they create a bit of an aura around them, like they have with Lomachenko and Usyk, and fighters like that, and Golovkin, it can work. We've seen that kind of Eastern European, Central Asian mystique that they build around them, and people seem to like it.
We could really do a whole podcast on that. Quite a few of the names you mentioned there actually train about an hour from me in India with Joel Diaz.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. That's where they all go, isn't it? Pretty much, because a lot of them are signed with World of Boxing, if not all of them. So they're kind of co-promoted World of Boxing. A few of them have gone with, or I've covered quite a few on Matchroom shows. Madrimov, Giasov in particular, Akhmadaliev. Some of them are signed with Golden Boy. Melikuzev's with Golden Boy. Me and Matt Macklin were talking to Robert Diaz about him the other day. And they're just really, really good, well-schooled fighters who really, really want it. Not all of them are going to turn out to be brilliant, but they will always give good value. And yeah, they're all heading for India, aren't they? They're all, like you say, they're all there with him. And that fight, Melikuzev Kovalev, that's a really interesting fight, because Robert Diaz is a matchmaker, obviously, and he thinks that it's just the perfect fight, because even if he doesn't win, Melikuzev, so long as he doesn't get knocked out and absolutely destroyed, and he just can't see that happening, then it's going to bring him on, whatever happens. But he thinks that he's going to stop Kovalev, Melikuzev. He's 6-0, and yeah, he might. That could happen.
We'll get on to that, towards the end. We're going to preview some of the big fights that have kind of been arranged for 2021. Talking about another prospect we've got coming up next week, Saturday, the 2nd of January, from the American Airlines Center, Dallas, Texas, on DAZN out here in, and out here in the US, and DAZN in the UK, right? Is Ryan Garcia, unbeaten, 20-0 against Luke Campbell, 20 wins and 3 losses. This is going to be for the interim WBC. So Andy, this is going to be the biggest fight probably at the start of the year. How much does people in the UK know about Ryan Garcia?
Not loads. It depends kind of what bracket of fan you're talking about. So boxing fans, dedicated boxing fans, they know about him. And he's got a heavy presence on social media, of course. So he's probably got a higher profile than most American fighters. And it's garnered quite a lot of attention, this fight, because obviously it was supposed to happen. It's been rumoured all year for reasons we're all well aware of. It didn't happen earlier in the year, and it's been pushed back. And it is a really interesting fight, I think, because Golden Boy are totally convinced that this is the right time for Garcia, and that he's going to stop Luke Campbell. That's what they think is going to happen. I went up to Hull to see Luke a couple of weeks ago for DAZN, and he's very, very confident. And his confidence is 100% real at all times. He's possibly one of the most confident, if not the most confident fighter I've ever met, Campbell, because he doesn't really say a lot. But the reason he doesn't say a lot is not because he lacks the ability to talk or intelligence or confidence or personality. It's just because he doesn't really feel like he needs to say anything. He thinks Ryan Garcia is too soon, and that he's going to teach him a painful lesson. I think it's a really difficult one to call myself, because when you speak to people at Golden Boy and they're so sure about him, and of course, like off the record, you think, oh, okay, well, I get that in public you've got to say that he's going to win by miles. And I get that even to me, kind of privately, you still got to say that he's going to win. But to be so confident it kind of makes you wonder. I picked Luke Campbell at the start and I'll stick with it because I generally do. But I mean, it is a really, really good fight. It's a really good fight. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Should be a good fight. I think, in my opinion, and, people that listen to this podcast weekly, they know my view on Ryan Garcia. I think he's massively overrated. I thought when he went to Eddie Reynoso, they would have taken him in, tried to get rid of some of those fundamental flaws, like throwing punches with his eyes closed. Every time he throws his hook, he drops his his hand that should be covering his chin. A lot of the time he backs up and, kind of throws punches with his chin in the air. He's kind of a little bit flat-footed. I always describe him as a lightweight Deontay Wilder. He's good going forward, but terrible as soon as you put it on him. Obviously he's 20-0, and all prospects coming up kind of get fed. People are going to win. It's people are going to beat, and especially when you've got that kind of social media behind you. They're going to help him. And he's a lot of his wins so far have been against people he's dragged up from divisions below, very slow, made him look very good. He had a fight with a local guy out here, Carlos Morales. And, Carlos Morales, was stinging him with a jab. And, Ryan was kind of closing his eyes and didn't know what to do because, someone was actually firing back at him for once. And obviously a lot of the sparring stories you hear out here is, as soon as Ryan starts to lose in sparring, he'll make some kind of excuse or an injury and, he'll get out the ring. He's kind of padded his amateur record like you touched on with other people. People just take it for gospel. So to me, I think he's just one of those that it could be. A lot of people at Golden Boy have started drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say out here. And it could be a fight too far, I think. I think if, Luke kind of backs him up, stays away from that very fast, accurate hook that he has, I think Luke could actually have an easy night.
Well, the interesting thing about this fight and these kinds of fights is that could happen because, like you say, they could all just be sticking to the script in every conversation they have, that this guy's the real thing, blah, blah, blah. And this is what's going to happen. But no one knows because he just hasn't been in this deep. He hasn't been in with anyone as good as Campbell. And when you look at what's happened in real life, which is the only thing you can do when you're trying to assess who's more likely to win a fight, then Luke Campbell should be a heavy, heavy favourite because of the fights he's been in and what he's achieved. He's all potential, Garcia. And that's impossible to measure. But then you do get fighters who come along who are all potential, who haven't ever really done anything, and they do deliver on it. I remember Gervonta Davis coming here to box Liam Walsh and for the vacant title, IBF super featherweight title. And at that point, Davis had no one on his record really, but a massive reputation. And he was the real thing. So it happens. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that Garcia is either. And Campbell is technically a very accomplished, very skillful fighter. And he doesn't really have many miles on the clock, even though he's 33, 34 now. So it could all come crashing down around Garcia. It could all come crashing down. I mean, I think he might come out quite quick and see if he can get on top of Campbell early on. But it was interesting to hear him talk about. We had this clip that we had on a laptop to play to Luke when we went up to the gym to see him, and it was Garcia. He just finished sparring, I think, or training anyway, and he's leaning on the ropes. And they obviously said, like, over there, let's give a message for Luke Campbell. And he was saying, I'm going to beat the shit out of him and leave him gasping for air and stuff like that. But the bit I found interesting was because he's training with Canelo now, he was saying, we're next level. He's never kind of been up against anyone like us. And I just thought, don't be lumping yourself in with Canelo just because you're training with Canelo. You're not Canelo. And that is a mistake that people can make sometimes, isn't it? And it's a bit dangerous. It's like, great if all this stuff rubs off and you feel the power and, you feel the buzz off it and it takes you to new heights in training and all the rest of it. But don't be thinking you're him because you're training with him, because you aren't. So, yeah, like for all of those reasons, I'm really looking forward to it.
It's interesting because, like you touched on, obviously, Luke comes in, Olympian. Had several, big fights against Lomachenko, Jorge Linares. But he's actually the betting underdog.
Yeah, I mean, it's odds on boxing are absolutely insane most of the time. We've had a few belters over here recently. Dubois against Joyce, perfect example. Dubois is all potential. Joyce is actual achievement. He's got a deeper professional record and outstrips him as an amateur by miles. Obviously, Daniel turned pro young, so that doesn't, that kind of takes away from that a bit. But Dubois was favourite for that fight, heavy favourite for that fight. Lyndon Arthur, Anthony Yarde, again, Lyndon Arthur was the outsider, but you look at his professional record, you take out the Kovalev fight, and he probably had it tougher, and he was definitely a better amateur. And we had another one that last week as well, Shakan Pitters, Craig Richards. Shakan Pitters, heavy favourite. Look at their records. Based on what? It's just whoever's got the more noise around them, basically. I haven't looked at the odds. I haven't looked at UK odds for Garcia-Campbell, but I can see why. I can see how it's gone that way. But they're so confident, him and Shane McGuigan. And I really hope that he does it, Campbell, because I'm not covering the fight, and I just think it would be a real shame if he retired without having won a world title, because he's definitely good enough. Like you mentioned, those two fights he's had so far, Linares and Lomachenko, it doesn't really get much harder than that, and he very nearly beat Linares. So I would love to see him win. I would love to see him win on the second, and it'd be very, very interesting to see how Garcia came back from it, were he to lose.
It'd be interesting, if both of them, obviously, if Luke wins or Ryan wins, they're going to face Devin Haney, it seems, for the supposedly full title, I guess, even though he's kind of, everyone's calling him an email champion. How do you see both of those fights going?
Haney, I think Haney's definitely better than at the minute. You've got to say that Haney's ahead of Garcia, I think, in terms of who he's boxed, in terms of how he's looked. I've gone quite deep into Haney because I've covered him a few times, and I met him when he came over to London with his dad. He was in at Sky doing the podcast, and his backstory is just really interesting because he was a stellar like junior as an amateur, and then turned pro at 16, but had to go to Mexico to do it because he was too young. And they resisted all overtures from promoters and did their own thing. And he became a licensed promoter at the age of like 18 or something like that. And they spent quite a lot of time in Las Vegas with Mayweather and learned a lot from him about how they might go about things. And then they finally signed a promotional deal with Matt Truman DAZN, and I'm guessing it would have been phenomenal. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it because nobody else could get them to do it. And I think they had offers from basically everyone. So, whatever figure was on the bottom of that piece of paper, it must have been astronomical. And he's performed, hasn't he? He's done the business. I don't, this WBC franchise bullshit is just, it's so, the idea that Lopez has got to beat Devin Haney to be crowned undisputed champion is just absolutely ridiculous. But I do think Haney's a real force and is only going to get better. So I think he would. I would pick him to beat Garcia, and I would pick very, very tight against Campbell. Very, very tight against Campbell. I think he might have. I think he might have a little bit too much for Campbell. Myself.
You think Devin is going to be the real deal? The reason I ask that is because obviously, he didn't have the best performance against Gamboa. A lot of people said he should have got Gamboa out of there. And I do start to worry because he starts posting everything is about money. Everything's about, I think it was arguing with Teofimo Lopez or somebody saying like, well, you haven't made $1 million per fight like I have. And, when boxers and, celebrities start to say that, I'm like, are they in it for the right reasons now? Is it just financial all the time?
Yeah, that I know what you mean about that. It's something that the older pros talk about a lot, isn't it? And particularly ones who are now retired, that across all sports really, that you can get too much too soon, and it takes the edge off you. It takes the hunger off you. And they have been very clever right from the beginning. Like Bill is his old man who trains him, but very much kind of is open to all other help. And he's got a music business background, so he always knew about contracts and all this kind of thing, and making sure that you were not, under lock and key to anybody, and keeping your options open and all those kinds of things. But really, at that stage, you don't really want it to be too much about that. You want it to be about the titles, and there's no doubt that he's getting paid well, because, like I said, that contract he signed, they wouldn't have signed it if it wasn't absolutely mega. I mean, he wasn't great against Gamboa, but at the same time, you can't be brilliant every time. And I remember people being quite critical of Lopez after his fight against Nakatani. Didn't look great, did he? Or didn't look as good as he had. I was one of them. I thought, maybe that kind of showed us that it was a bit too much hype, and maybe he wasn't all that. And look at what he did. So you can't be brilliant every time, but at the same time, when I kind of spent a bit of time with him, not loads, but he's kind of got an old head on young shoulders. I didn't get the impression with him that he was going to be somebody who was going to get distracted. But you can make too much money too quickly and lose focus. You might think you haven't, but you have.
I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know either. Yeah. But yeah, I'm told you can make too much money too quickly and lose focus. We're two of the most focused people you'll ever meet, probably.
Moving on that same card, an interesting fight. Renee Alvarado, 32-8, up against Roger Gutierrez, 24-3-1. Renee Alvarado defended his WBA super featherweight title, which he won from Andrew Cancio last November. Alvarado on a bit of a purple patch in his career. Really, his eight wins in a row, a streak that began in 2017 when he actually lost a decision to somebody we just spoke about, Gamboa. What do you think of this fight, Andy? It's kind of good fight for like the hardcore fans. Both of them throw a lot of punches.
Yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? Definitely. It's good to watch Alvarado. I was a bit gutted when he beat Cancio, because I just thought Cancio's story was brilliant, and well, it just wasn't it? Those back-to-back wins he had, which weren't supposed to happen. And yeah, I mean, Alvarado again, he's the kind of fighter who you want to see do well, who you want to see make some money, because he brings good entertainment, and you want to see people like that get out of boxing what they put in. And you would expect him to win this fight. I would say, yeah. And he's entertaining. He's good value, and for that reason, you would always fancy watching him against anybody, really.
Yeah, for any people who don't know him, definitely tune in for the fight. He just throws punches and bunches. He just does not stop. He has some crazy cardio. And then on the next fight down, actually, his brother, Felix Alvarado, a recent signing by Golden Boy, 35-2, up against DJ Creel, 16-1-1. And this is another title fight. This is for the IBF light flyweight. This is Creel will seek for his second title in as many weight divisions against Felix Alvarado. Close. This is a close fight to pick. This is probably the closest one, in my opinion, on these the three title fights on this card.
Yeah, this isn't one I know much about. I can't lie, but it's good to see a world light flyweight title fight on a major card. Full stop. To be honest, because these are the kinds of fights that haven't really attracted that much attention in recent times. Obviously, super flyweight's got a lot of buzz off HBO, and they kept that going, and that's persisted with Estrada and Gonzalez coming back with a win and all that kind of thing. And we've seen some flyweights in the UK with Martinez being a Matchroom USA fighter and Charlie Edwards winning a title, and Jay Harris boxing Martinez. And then light flyweight, you almost think sometimes maybe that's just one too many. People aren't just going to be, they're just not going to be interested in it. So it's good to see them getting the exposure and getting a place on a decent card, because what you can always guarantee with those lighter weights is that it's a good watch, because generally, although we have seen some pretty vicious knockouts actually at those weights over the last 3 or 4 years. Generally, you get good value for money because they throw loads of punches, but they're not going to stop each other. That's usually what you see. So that'll be a good watch, I'm sure.
It has kind of, like you touched on just then, it has changed a little bit. They have had a few heavy punches, arrive since the super flyweights came around. But yeah, in general, you get like thousands and thousands of punches in a decision. But it has changed a little bit. Then moving on to the end of year awards, we decided to try and do, one local, so one UK pick, and then also one from around the world. So fighter of the year, Andy, if you could give us both your UK and rest of the world pick.
So for the rest of the world, I thought there's quite a few candidates really, but I thought I just couldn't get past Teofimo Lopez because that was just such a massive win and such a massive upset, and to become undisputed. We've had more people do it over the last few years than we had previously. It was a real rarity. And then Crawford did it, and then Usyk did it, and now he's done it, and Katie Taylor did it, and Cressida Shields did it, and Jessica McCaskill had done it. But it doesn't really cheapen it, I don't think. It's still absolutely huge, and it wasn't supposed to happen. Anyone comfortably, I didn't at the time understand the kind of debate about the scoring, because for me there wasn't any debate about the scoring really. He won the fight and he got the win, so good stuff. That's what you always hope is going to happen. And I did see the stuff he was saying this week, Lomachenko, about the judges being bribed, and then he said a couple of days later that got lost in translation, and he was saying that they were biased. He wasn't saying that they were bribed. So I hope that's kind of what happened, because otherwise he's going down the Deontay Wilder rabbit hole of just making a bit of a fool of himself, to be honest. But back to Lopez, it's just a massive win. And loads of people saw it, which was the great thing, because it was on normal TV with you, wasn't it? ESPN.
Yeah, ESPN, yeah.
I think they put it on ESPN Plus as well, did they? And they got loads of eyeballs on it. So yeah, him I would go for. UK wise, I thought I'd pick Terry Harper, because she's had 3 world title fights in a year and won them all. And I can't think of anyone else who's done that. I'm pretty sure there isn't anyone else who's done that. Won it back in February when we had crowds in Sheffield against Eva Wahlström. Really good performance. Very hard fight against Natasha Jonas, which resulted in a draw. I thought Jonas just nicked it, but I wasn't outraged by the draw. And then another good performance a few months ago to retain it. So, she's very much kind of improving. I think what is she now? Like 11 wins and 1 draw, I think. So yeah, I'd go for her. So yeah, Teofimo Lopez and Terry Harper. What about you?
For the rest of the world, I went for the same. I think pretty much everybody's picked Teofimo Lopez or Tyson Fury. But for local, for the British fighter, I actually went for Denzel Bentley.
Oh, nice.
Fought 3 times in I think about 4 months against some good opposition. Mick Hall, and then he had those 2 fights with Mark Heffron, and obviously in the second fight managed to some thudding shots, managed to close his eye, and got the win. So I thought that was a bit of a solid pick, because it's kind of hard this year with lots of fighters only having 1 fight.
That is a good pick. He trains at the Peacock, and the Peacock's just down the road from me. Well, the old Peacock, which is on Caxton Street in Canning Town, that's where they all used to train. But the pros, most of them seem to have moved to the new Peacock, which is in Epping, which is pretty much, it's the same side of London. It's just a little bit further east. But yeah, I kind of met him about 18 months ago, and I went down there to do a podcast for Sky. And yeah, I liked him. There's a lot of good fighters down there. There's a lot of good young kind of London fighters, like Craig Richards is another one, Dan Aziz is another one, Linus Udofia. They're all around about the same weight. But yeah, that is a good pick, because it was a really good fight, that first one against Heffron. And then the second time around, he really did the business. He really did the business. And they've got a real good thing going on there, that group of fighters like him and Louis Lin, and they're kind of led by Daniel Dubois. So that was a bit of a blow for them, obviously, but yeah, British title. You can see what it meant to him too, which is always great.
Moving on, fight of the year, British and rest of the world, if you can, Andy.
So rest of the world, I went with Fury Wilder, because I was looking at the other categories and I realised that there's one other category where this is going to feature as well, but although it was completely one-sided. So, I mean, the other one that I was thinking of was Zabita Baranchyk. I mean, that's, you know, an unbelievable fight, you know, in so many ways, and I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, Fury Wilder was just like, I can't remember the last time I sat and watched a fight just in utter astonishment. And it was a massive event, and it was before, you know, just before COVID put pay to everything, you know, ended any enjoyment we have in our lives. And but it was just the way he did it. It was absolutely incredible. I was just speechless sitting there watching it, just thinking, wow, he's doing what he said he would do, which none of us really believed he would or could do, and he's smashing him to pieces. To put that kind of performance like that on a stage like that, it's just, there's nothing like it really. So I would go for that one. Domestically, I would go for Dubois against Joyce. I mean, I went to see, I was there for Terry Harper against Natasha Jonas, and that was a really, really good fight. But I was at Dubois Joyce as well, and it was just a big fight. Like, it was the biggest domestic fight that we had this year, and they put it on anyway, even though they were postponing it, hoping to get crowds back. Realised they weren't going to, and the build-up was really, really good. And on the night, it was just incredibly dramatic, but in a way that you didn't really expect. And boxing has a way of delivering that, doesn't it? You don't really, just somehow it comes up with something that you couldn't have scripted at all. And yeah, so I really enjoyed that fight. I found that fight absolutely, engrossing, really.
Mine, I'm going to go with Jose Zepeda against Ivan Baranchyk. I think, all the previews before the fight was, either Jose Zepeda's going to win, by decision, because he's, very technical, but not exactly heavy-handed. And Baranchyk's kind of the opposite. He's very heavy-handed, comes in, throws a lot of punches, very, very, very strong, just kind of bullies people inside the ring. So to have, 4 or 5 knockdowns, Jose Zepeda wins by KO, was just completely out there. No one expected it. So I think, that was definitely, my fight of the year. And then domestically, I'm going to go with someone you actually touched on. I thought the Terry Harper and Natasha Jonas fight was, just incredible, because it was one of those fights where everybody apart from Joe Gallagher had kind of written Natasha Jonas off. And, Terry Harper went in there and kind of went life and death with her. And then also just one of those fights where, depending on what you liked in terms of style or whether you kind of favor the underdog, it was a real 50-50 pick. And I think something, we'd all like to see again, but I don't know whether Eddie Hearns, decide to wrap her in cotton wool and, keep her away from, Natasha Jonas for the time being.
Yeah, it was a tough one for Natasha Jonas. Like, we saw her, I was with her a couple of weeks after that. She joined us to work for Sky on the White Povetkin card, and they're very resilient, all athletes, but boxers particularly, because you just get used to, sometimes you get used to living with not getting what you think you deserve. And I remember on the night I had Jonas winning, and I didn't have a big problem with the draw. I mean, on the night I actually had it 7-3 for Jonas, which was wider than anyone else I saw. But 2 of those rounds were really, really close. I had 2 really close rounds, and I gave them both to Jonas. And what most people will do if they've got 2 really close rounds is they'll go 1 each, because they'll remember, I gave the first really close one to Shep, and I'll give the second really close one to Clarke. That's not what you're supposed to do, but that's what people often do. So the draw for me was fine, because I could easily give them both of those to Harper. I couldn't see the 6 rounds to 4 in favour of Harper, which people might think sounds a bit odd, because if I can see 5-5, surely you can see, but you've got to draw a line somewhere. But it was a brilliant fight. It was a brilliant fight. She was so close, Natasha, and you just hope she gets another chance, or just a big fight. Yeah. Katie Taylor, whoever, just a big fight.
And the next one, Trainer of the Year, home and abroad. This is one I'm kind of looking forward to see your picks, because kind of hard to judge, because a lot of fighters haven't had the chance to get out and do too many big fights. So it's going to be interesting to see who you pick.
So I'm going to go for Sugar Hill for the global one, because I just think that the the way Fury did it against Wilder, like I go on about this fight constantly whenever I'm asked about anything really, but it was amazing. And yes, he said he was going to do it, and yes, he went off to the Kronk, which is the perfect place to do it. But to actually then go out and do it, and right, Fury's the one who's got to do it. But at the same time, he very specifically went to that place because he knew that that's how they do things there. So I think the trainer's got to take a lot of credit for that, because none of us had ever seen Fury box like that. It's not what he does. It's not what he does. And it really did lay down a marker for him now being just the complete heavyweight, because what can he not do? There is nothing he can't do by the look of it now. He can box and move like a middleweight if he wants to, or he can get on the front foot and take you out. And maybe he couldn't do that against somebody who was bigger than Wilder, because Wilder doesn't carry that much weight. And I know in the early days, Golden Boy were always worried about his chin when he was with them, but nobody else had managed to do that to him. So I thought that was pretty extraordinary, actually. And domestically, I'll be tempted to go with Steffi Bull, who trains Terry Harper, just because he's somebody who doesn't get all that much attention. And he's trained a lot of good fighters down the years, the McDonald twins. He's got a fighter called Anthony Tomlinson at the minute, who's a good fighter coming through. Him and Ray Doyle do the training. And he kind of brought Harper back into boxing after she'd fallen out of love with it, got her back involved, and has just done a really good job with her. So, and he's a really good bloke as well. So, he's not somebody who gets a lot of attention. But another guy I would mention too is Stephen Broughton, who was in Joe Joyce's corner on the night, because Joyce is trained by Ismail Salas, but Salas wasn't there for a lot of camp, and he wasn't there on the night. And Stephen Broughton, he was the man. And people weren't dismissive of him, but we all knew him because he'd been with Shane McGuigan quite a lot and with Haymaker quite a lot and all the rest of it. But people were talking in the build-up about, that could be a real problem for Joyce, that he hasn't got Salas in the corner. He's brought on experienced enough, all the rest of it. And he had a good night. He had a really good night too.
I went with, for my kind of abroad or rest of the world, is Teofimo Lopez Sr. I thought just everybody counted Teofimo out. Just the game plan that he had, to keep having to make, Vasyl Lomachenko reset, keeping the arm out there so that, Teofimo couldn't, throw a jab and then step to the side like he always likes to do. I just thought the game plan was amazing. Everybody counted him out. He pretty much called, I think, the last, like the 15th fight and the 16th fight. I think he said, the 15th fight, Teo will be a world champion. And in the 16th fight, he'll be undisputed and he'll fight, Lomachenko. So, just the tactics that he went with and, just calling it, he called his whole career when everyone was doubting him. So just an amazing performance, I thought, from him. And, domestically, I went with Shane McGuigan. Just some of the work he's been doing. We know with Luke Campbell, who has this big fight coming up. The changes we've seen in Lawrence Okoli, I thought was great, taking on Anthony Fowler. And then somebody, I know he's not with him now, but the performance and, what he did with Josh Taylor, obviously, taking him on, all the work that he's done and, guiding him through those fights to be, undisputed 140 in, 16 fights, picking, some fights where people were like, that's a little bit too soon for Josh Taylor, but, right time. So I thought it was good performance from him this year.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with any of that. Coley looked good the other night and his opponent wasn't up to much, but there were differences and you could see them. And I completely agree about Taylor. I thought that the McGuigans just did the perfect job with him. I did quite a lot of his early fights and remember him boxing Dave Ryan for the Commonwealth title after like 5 or 6 fights. And Dave Ryan is a good fighter and he just put Dave Ryan away. And then he was just stepping up. Miguel Vasquez, Victor Postola was there for that. And you knew that he was totally ready when he went into his world title fights. You knew he was totally ready. And an amazing fight against Prograis, like probably still one of the top 3 fights I've ever been ringside for. It was just brilliant and superb. And what we're hoping for in the new year, obviously, is that Taylor and Ramirez fight for undisputed. And surely there's just no reason why that won't happen because they're both top rank. They've both got mandatories out of the way. Jack Catterall's agreed to step aside. and they can just do it. I guess they'll just wait and see if they do it in March or April, then they might be able to get something approaching a proper full house back for it. But that's, yeah. And I feel for Shane McGuigan that he lost a fighter there due to other circumstances for the second time. Frampton and then Josh Taylor. But he keeps doing the business, doesn't he? So people will keep going to him. Anthony Yarde put out a tweet today basically saying that at the moment, Tunde Ajayi is still his manager and still his trainer, but he might not be for much longer. That was the general gist of it, basically. And what people are thinking is that if he wants to stay in and around London, Anthony, which I think he probably will, then you're looking at Shane McGuigan or Adam Booth, probably. I mean, there's other really good trainers too. Mark Tibbs, he's really local to Anthony Yarde, and he'd know him from the Peacock too, actually. But yeah, I mean, the lure of the kind of McGuigan gym would be pretty strong, I think.
I'd be interested, you touched on Anthony Yarde there, to see where he does land. Kind of a PR nightmare coming out and saying, at the minute, so that pretty much means he's gone. If you're already putting out a tweet like that, as a coach, it's not really, doesn't fill you with confidence.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the terms of a managerial contact, I'd guess will probably mean that he would still be under managerial contract. Not that I really know, to be honest, how it all works, but they tend to be, I think there's kind of like a minimum length as far as I understand it. Whereas with trainers, it's like it's a free for all. You can have a handshake, you can do whatever. Whereas if somebody's managing you, then it's a much more solid thing that the Board of Control insist is solidified and documented. I mean, it was that fight against Lyndon Arthur was really interesting because it was always going to be a difficult one for him because he's a very well-schooled fighter, Lyndon Arthur. And it was really close. Like I had it 115, 113 to Lyndon Arthur. Quite a lot of people were getting very carried away with, he's totally dictated the fight with the jab and he's cruised. And I just thought, he hasn't, this is close. And the two judges are at 115, 114, which is like half a round, basically, if you want to describe it like that. And the other one had it by 7 rounds to Anthony Yarde. And that's, I think, what made him think after the fight that those two judges had got it wrong and that judge had got it right, because the corner were telling him that he was definitely winning. And he wasn't. And you could see that he definitely wasn't. It's one of those ones where you just you knew that if he was going to kind of, I never pay too much attention to what fighters say straight after a fight. If they've lost and they think they've won and they say they think they've won and it's a bad decision, even if you think they're wrong, it's kind of fair enough because, it's spur of the moment stuff. But hopefully he would have gone away and watched it. And he might still think he won because it was close, but he would watch it and think, okay, I still think I won, but I understand now how that happened. How it was close enough that I didn't win, because it was quite bizarre stuff from the corner at times. They weren't really telling him much other than you're winning. And so at the end, when he didn't get it, the bemusement on his face wasn't any kind of a game, I don't think. He genuinely couldn't believe it.
I think the problem I've always had with Anthony Yarde is he seems to be about how it looks more than the actual substance, always kind of talks in like motivational quotes instead of just talking. Obviously the lines in the camp, the fancy Floyd Mayweather pad work. And then he skipped the entire British and European scene. He did like a Chris Lovejoy where he just kind of fought a load of nobodies, got a lot of wins, got highly ranked, went for that payday against Kovalev. He performed well for that one round where he kind of nearly got him out of there, and then just had no bad cardio and kind of punched himself silly that the fact that Kovalev kind of knocked him out with a jab because he was so tired. And then the fact that he skipped the whole entire British and European scene always had me kind of wondering, is he just a product that they were just going to sell to the highest bidder and then quickly cash out? And that seemed to be what he did. So, I hope that he can look at himself and, think that he needs to completely rebuild. Some of the simple things like cutting off a ring, you can't do.
Yeah, he is kind of an intriguing case. I don't really know him, but it's going to sound a bit odd, but I know a lot of people who know him, and I live where he's from, and I kind of know the area, and I know what you mean about him talking in kind of like motivational kind of sound bites, but a lot of young athletes who are his age, who train in the same kind of environment as him, that's kind of what they do. That's kind of their thing. And I don't really mind it. I mean, I think you could maybe come up with something a bit better than lines in the camp, but, you know, each to their own. As regards, I think he is a thinker, and I think he does realise now that there were maybe patches of his boxing education which he didn't get, which he needed to get. But I think he's always put a lot of trust in Tunde, and I think maybe now he's looking at it and believing or realising there are things that we didn't do that we should have done that I need to go back and do. It's not too late. I can go back and do them, because he does have really good natural athleticism. And he's got a lot going for him. And I think that he can. There's a lot to work with there, I think. But yeah, like you say, if you get the thing about the sanctioning bodies is that you can get ranked highly quickly. And that's what happened. And then they don't really want to fight for a British title because they think he might lose. They don't really want to fight Callum Johnson. I think he was put into an eliminator with Hosea Burton at one point, and they didn't want it because they felt that they'd already gone past that. So all of a sudden there's too much on the line. And with Frank Warren's always thinking like, he's brilliant at thinking like 3-4 steps ahead, 2-3 years ahead. And I don't think they ever thought that he would have to box Kovalev. I think they looked at Kovalev and thought, by the time we get there, he'll either have moved on or be just about to move on, or it'll be the case that he'll look at Anthony Yarde as a mandatory and think, that is a total waste of my time, and vacate rather than do it. And I think he would have, were it not for the fact that he had the Alvarez fight lined up and he needed that WBO title for the fight against Canelo, because that's what Canelo and his team were interested in. So it almost worked perfectly. But I agree, yeah, he does need to rebuild. But I do think he can do it. I think he's got the resilience and the wherewithal to kind of suck this up and start again a bit. I think he can do that.
I hope so. You know, he seems like a nice guy. He looks like the full package. You know, he's British, so there's some good fights, especially domestically for him.
Yeah, there are. And there's a great kind of round robin that they could do there for big titles potentially, like Callum Johnson, Boatsy, Yarde, Lyndon Arthur. Now, yeah, there's plenty going on.
Going back to the awards, KO of the year, knockout of the year, domestic and abroad.
So the one I saw domestically, so like in this country, which was the most dramatic, was Povetkin. I was a few yards away from that, and that was you know, pretty amazing, really. You know, in that outdoor setting with the kind of like wind whispering through the trees out the back of the Matchroom mansion, that was pretty unforgettable. Dalton Smith gave us a really good one in fight camp as well against Nathan Bennett. That was a good one. It was a stoppage rather than a clean knockout, but Zelfa Barrett against Jake Donovan, his first name I've forgotten for some reason. That was a great punch. Eric Donovan, great left hand. Internationally, Gervonta Davis against Leo Santa Cruz, because it was just an unbelievable shot. And also it's Leo Santa Cruz, you know, it's not, I mean, he's gone too far above his natural weight now, Leo Santa Cruz, hasn't he really? But he's still Leo Santa Cruz. And to do that to someone like him, to do that to anybody is impressive, but to do that to someone like him, and the uppercut always looks horrific, doesn't it? It always looks so savage. So yeah, those two uppercuts, I guess, Povetkin and Gervonta Davis.
Boringly, I picked the same two. You know, obviously the Povetkin, Dylan White looked like he was, you know, home and dry. You know, it looked like Povetkin, and supposedly his corner, I think Chris Lloyd got it interpreted, or someone told him that, I think the corner had told him, you have like one more round and we're going to pull you out. I don't know how true that is.
There's a bit of debate about that because he did say that, Chris, and he got that from, I think, someone he knows at DAZN who maybe they had someone who spoke Russian near the court or just listening in or whatever it was. But somebody else I know who speaks Russian listened to it and said, no, they didn't say that. They just said, are you okay? And he just said, yeah. I mean, they're incredibly poker-faced, that Povetkin team, like no one I've ever seen before. It's like watching the Russians in the amateurs, like they just no emotion whatsoever. But maybe they did say that because he's getting on a little bit, to say the least. And that was a pretty brutal rap. That was what made the knockout even more unbelievable, wasn't it? Because you just thought, wow, I really didn't see that coming. But I think they're going to do that again as I understand it, they were hoping to do it at the end of January. That's not going to happen now. March, I think. I think they're looking at like early March or something like that.
Look forward to them running that back. And then lastly, for the awards, your prospect of the year for 2021, home and abroad.
So abroad, I'm just pushing out all those Uzbeks. So led by Melikuziev because he's got that fight against Kovalev, but any of them, Israel Madrimov, he's closing in on a world title at super welterweight. Muradjon Akhmadaliev isn't a prospect because even though he's 8-0, he's already a unified champion. But others who are coming up, Hassanboy Dusmatov, he's 1-0, but he was a phenomenal amateur, so we'll see how he does. Shakobadin Zoirov, he's another gold medalist. Shakram Giasov, who has looked really good at times and not so great at other times. Bakadir Jalalov, heavyweight. These fellas are, like I said, they're coming, and they are genuine prospects because even though they've got these sprawling international amateur careers, they're still in single figures for pro fights. And I'm always a little bit confused as to what sometimes people class as prospects. I read something the other day which was talking about Gervonta Davis being a prospect, and it's just like, he's a world champion. He's not a prospect. UK wise, I'm going to go for a fighter called Dante Dixon. I've done a few of his fights.
Billy Joe Saunders' guy.
Yeah, I've done a few of his fights. He was a good amateur as a junior. He's 20, he turned pro when he was like 18. He's got MTK and Billy Joe Saunders behind him. And he's just looked really, really good. We saw him at Wembley Arena, not the pay-per-view show, maybe it was the one before that, but he was in with a good fighter, and a Welsh fighter called Angelo Dragoni, who had a really good tussle for a Welsh area title. So that's the kind of level he was at, and he really brought it. And Dixon handled it. And he's not flashy. He doesn't say that much, but there just seems to be a lot there in terms of fundamentals. Boxing at featherweight at the minute, but he'll probably move up because he's young. But yeah, every time we've seen him, he's looked great. And yeah, he's 5-0. So yeah, genuine prospect material. Dalton Smith, another one from Sheffield. He's always worth a look too.
I went on the British scene. I may have been cheating, but I think he's still kind of a prospect. Dennis McCann. Oh
no, he counts. Yeah, definitely. He's under 10 fights, isn't he? Yeah. I mean, I've seen him a couple of times, and yeah, like he is very good. Traveller. So learned to box when he was really, really young, and you can tell. So he's been doing it a really long time, even though he's only 19. Won everything as a junior and youth. Turned pro young, and he's with Alan Smith in South London, who's a really good trainer. Maybe got hit a little bit too much in his last fight, but no big deal there. Yeah, no, he's a good pick. He's a good choice.
And then another young one, I think still classed as I think he's 5-0, a Puerto Rican, only 18 years old, signed to Top Rank at the age of 16. I went for Xander Zayas. Do you remember him from the amateur scene?
No, not really, because he would have been a junior and a youth. And I did do some youth tournaments, but not too many. I've read about him. I've seen one of his fights, I think. And yeah, people are excited, aren't they? And we're probably about due for another big Puerto Rican star, because it hasn't really happened for Felix Verdejo. They were expecting it to be him, weren't they? And I know he's still going, and the story's not over, but it's not really happened for him. But it's a real, you can get phenomenal support, can't you, boxing as a Puerto Rican in the USA? I mean, Cotto, isn't the only one by any stretch, but he particularly like Cote Nights in New York and Orlando as well, where they've got a massive Puerto Rican population. He used to do huge numbers. So yeah, I mean, that would fit, wouldn't it? That'd be that. I mean, I've not really seen him much. What's he like?
He's good, very tall, still a teenager, tall, welterweight, heavy-handed. Seems to be very well polished, from the amateur scene. And they're kind of moving him slowly but surely, obviously letting him get his man strength. He looks to be doing some, some very good sparring. He's based out of Florida, signed with Peter Khan, who's obviously, created quite a few, well-known boxers. Recently was training with George Kambosos before Kambosos fought Lee Selby. Emmanuel Tagbo as well. He was obviously ranked number 1, mandatory for the WBO title. So, he's mixing it with the right people. I think he is the youngest professional signed by Top Rank. He beat out Gabriel Flores, who was also 16, but he beat him and obviously turned pro down in Mexico. And then I think it was turned 18 this year and had his, kind of US debut this year in the I think it was the Las Vegas shows. So looks a good prospect, slowly but surely. So I think the Top Ranked tend to know what they're doing when they're pushing prospects along.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at all the experience they've got there with the guys behind the scenes, Bruce Trampler and Carl Moretti, and it's impossible to see how they don't make many wrong decisions, do they? They really don't, and they know exactly how to take it through the levels. And if he's what they think he is, then he will achieve what he should if he stays with them. That's just, you can't really ask for much more than that.
No, exactly. Probably one of the best promotions in terms of being a prospect and getting moved along at the right speed, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to 2021, some of the announced fights we've had so far this year. I don't think it's official, but it's been announced by Eddie Reynoso. Canelo looks to be coming back as soon as February the 27th in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, fighting Avni Yildirim, the fight nobody asked for.
No, that's true. But at the same time, I quite like this because it would suggest that he'll box 3 times next year. And I tweeted about it earlier on, and there was a little bit of uptake, and a few fighters saying, it would be better if elite fighters boxed more regularly because they are the peak years. That was the kind of point I was making. But TV can have a bearing on that, and they've got lives to lead outside the ring, and it's it's quite complicated to get that over the line. And I accept that, but it looks like he wants to clear up that super middleweight division, and Yildirim is the WBC champion, isn't he?
I think he was funny because he had that fight with Durrell, lost to Durrell, and then for some reason the WBC kind of installed him as a mandatory, even though he lost to Durrell and also lost in the World Boxing Super Series to Chris Eubank Jr. But I know he's kind of friendly with Canelo when he goes over for sparring, so I don't know whether Canelo is just kind of like, you're my buddy, so I'll get you a nice little payday. I'm kind of lost how he managed to get into that position. Yeah,
that's true. Anyway, I mean, the WBC have got something going on there, haven't they? Whether it's so that the fight between Canelo and Callum Smith, there was a WBC title attached to that. But I never really bothered, and this is terrible, but I never really bothered to find out which one it was, because the fight was just interesting enough for me, really, by itself. But it looks like he does want to try and clean up at super middleweight, in which case he would need to box Billy Joe Saunders in May, which is the rumor as well, isn't it? That'll happen, and then he would need to box Caleb Plant. I don't see him having any problems with any of them. And although you might look at it and think that's not a massively sexy year, if he can do those 3 fights this year and claim undisputed, which is a lovely big tick to put in your historical margin as a fighter, which I'm sure he'd love to do, then good work, because he's not going to have hung around and wasted any time, is he? And that's, fair enough, I think.
Pound for pound, number 1?
Yeah, I think I don't really see how you could argue that he isn't pound for pound number 1. I saw something the other day, which I think was ESPN driven, saying that Terence Crawford is a pound for pound number 1. And it's just not, I don't really see how that kind of thing doesn't do anyone any good, I don't think. It was a bit like when PBC earlier in the year on their coverage would kind of not name Crawford as one of the other champions in the welterweight division. It was like it was the PBC welterweight world title, which it kind of is apart from him, as we know. But it doesn't do anybody any good when you're just going to pick your own horse. And Crawford's awesome, but you can't. He's the clearest pound for pound number one I think we've had for quite a long time, actually.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. A fight we spoke about before we actually pressed record, Josh Warrington against Kanzu, looks to be getting announced shortly for February.
Yeah. I know Warrington's been really keen to get back out, re-sign with Matchroom about this time last year, or it would have been in the works at that stage. And so the timing was really unfortunate, and he was looking for a unification, whichever one he could get, really. He wasn't bothered. And this is just a really good fight because their styles are similar in that they throw loads of punches, and you cannot see this being anything other than really, really good to watch. And I think the reason that it hadn't already happened is because, we were looking like we were going to get crowds back, and then we went backwards. And then at the end of the year, we got 1,000 in for Joshua, and then it looks like we're probably going backwards again. And he can't wait forever. He's 30, Josh, I think. And he wants to fight. He's always boxed regularly. Since he won the world title, he's boxed regularly. And he's just, somebody it's impossible not to have a lot of admiration for just because of the way he's done things. He was an away corner fighter a lot of the time earlier in his career. People don't realise that because they look at the tickets he sold and those Leeds nights. But he won an English title on the road, 4 weeks' notice. He won a Commonwealth title on the road, same thing. And it was only at that point, really, that he started boxing in Leeds. And he became what he's become. And that took loads of hard work, selling all the tickets and going around the pubs and shaking hands and introducing yourself and dropping them off and all of that. So he's earned everything that he's got success-wise and money-wise. And you just got to love it when you beat someone like Lee Selby, who's a really, really good fighter, and you decide to give your first defense against Carl Frampton. Like, who does that? Like, nobody does that. So, yeah, it'd be great to see him unify, really would. And if he wins that fight, then who knows? Like, he still does featherweight pretty comfortably, I think. He would just be he would want to go and fight in Las Vegas after that, I'm sure.
And the one that I think all the hardcore fans are looking for, a rematch, Juan Francisco Estrada against Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, has been announced for March the 13th on DAZN. A rematch that we've been, waiting for years.
Yeah, it is years now as well, isn't it? I mean, when was that first one? 2012,
I think.
Oh yeah, 2012. Like, it's a really long time ago. And it was really just really good to see Gonzalez re-announce himself with that, at the expense of Calify, which was a bit painful because he's someone I know well. But for the division, it was good because Gonzalez we talked about HBO really investing in super flyweights earlier on, and he was very much at the forefront of that. He was very much their man, and they were gutted really when he lost to Sor Rungvisai first time, and then they got the rematch on and he lost again. And you just kind of hoped at that point that the sheen wouldn't go off that division, but it didn't because Estrada beat Sor Rungvisai and looks strong, looks really good. But Gonzalez looked good against Yafai. I did wonder whether, because at 33, I think he is now, he might even be 34 by now, but that's old for someone at that weight class. And he's had a lot of fights. And the first one against Sor Rungvisai was really hard. And then the second one was a really bad knockout. So you did kind of wonder whether that might be it. And the last thing you wanted to see was him get beaten up by somebody who he shouldn't be getting beaten up by. But that's a really good fight. That is a really good fight.
Well, Estrada's had 44 fights. Gonzalez has had 53.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of experience in there.
Yeah.
Lastly, before we let you go, Andy, what big fights would you like to see in 2021?
Well, we're all hoping for AJ against Fury. Over here we are. Sure you are. I think most of boxing is, we were talking to Bob Arrow, me and Matt Macklin on our podcast the other week, and he was telling us how, in the USA, no one cares about Joshua. But I still think they would want to see that. I still think they would want to see that fight, and Fury's his guy, obviously, so you can never take these things too seriously. And I'm pretty hopeful we will, because I think they're both now coming around to the idea that this just has to happen, and whether it's for all the belts or not, this just has to happen. Because I know that Joshua has always really wanted that undisputed crown, but I think he now is beginning to think, if the WBO completely lose their minds and insist that he has to fight Usyk or he'll be stripped, then he's just going to have to give up that belt. And I think Fury equally, I think if it turns out that he does have to rematch Wilder and that will get in the way of fighting Joshua, I think he'd give it up. I think he'd give up the WBC, and maybe that fight would just be for the WBA and the IBF, because it doesn't really matter, does it? Because everybody knows that whoever won that fight would be the number one. And you hear that it would be a 2-fight deal, and if that were to be the case, then even if they did all sanction the first one, they probably wouldn't all sanction the second one, because unless it's a draw, it wouldn't be a unification. It would just be one person with all the belts against the other one. At that point, they would fragment anyway. So, I'm really hopeful of that. And I'm less hopeful for Spence against Crawford. I'm just less hopeful. I mean, I really want to see it, but it's not. Crawford's comments the other day weren't particularly encouraging. And I mean, you know more about it than me, but it like they both want it, surely. Both the fighters want it. Is it just going to be another one of these things where I remember the first round of negotiations for Joshua against Wilder, and I never expected the first set to get anywhere because it's far too much flexing and posturing. And then you just think they might have that, and then the second time around it'll be more sensible. And it kind of looked like that might be what was going to happen. In the end, it didn't. But it's everybody. All you hear about now is splits, and I'm the A side, and you're this and you're that, and they're just going to have to 50-50 is the only way it's going to happen. But I don't think it would even happen then, would it? Because they both seem to think that they need to get more than the other one.
Yeah, it tends to be the issue. I think when you kind of read between the lines, both of them want to be the A side. Both of them don't want to, kind of like bend over to the other one and do a 50-50 split. And then at times it seems to me that Crawford's kind of thinks his resume's, good, and he doesn't really need to do anything else, which is kind of worrying at times. So I kind of hope that, eventually it's kind of taken out of their hands by, management or somebody, and they kind of just get forced into it, because I kind of worry that, Crawford's just going to fight these, B-level opponents and just retire. And there's going to be a constant argument about how great, he really was.
Yeah, what I don't, I understand him being high up on the pound for pound list, because obviously he won a world title at lightweight and then unified at super lightweight, and now he's a world champion at welterweight. But I never understand it when I see welterweight rankings, which can only be calculated by looking at what you've done at welterweight. I don't understand. And you see it in loads of lists, how he can be above Spence at welterweight. He just can't be, can he?
No, I mean,
Spence's wins at welterweight are way better.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in body of work rather than the eye test. You can look good.
Be that.
Yeah, I don't know, because you can look good against, mediocre opponents, and everyone's like, oh, he's passed the eye test. He's, pound for pound top 10, and you're like, well, you got to do it against, somebody of note, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the eye test thing is bollocks, to be honest, because it's just, firstly, that assumes that everybody who claims that he's passed the eye test, that they know what they're looking at in the first place. And for a lot of people, that just isn't true. And secondly, and because of that, you have to look at body of work. You just have to. You have to look at what's happened in real life. When you've got two sprinters on a track, boxing isn't measured by the kind of metrics that other sports are. And that's one of the things that makes it really, really fascinating, but also quite exasperating. If you're a 100-meter sprinter, you have to go out and run the times. You can't just talk about, how fast you could run. You can't just have a bloke standing by the track without a clock saying, well, I've seen him now and I know that he could run 9.8. Well, do it then. And that's Spencer's done it. That was a massive win against Kell Brook. That fight against Porter was one of the favourite ones I've seen, and he, Crawford's a brilliant fighter, but Spencer's done more at that weight. So I do really want to see it, and I'd love to see Canelo against Beterbiev as well. I mean, that doesn't fit into the plan that it looks like Canelo's got, but I think that is probably the fight if they've got any intention of going up to light heavyweight again. I don't know if they have or not really, but I don't want to see him get beaten just because he comes up against someone who's too big and too strong for him. But because he's been up there once, there will be a clamour for him to do it again. And Beterbiev's like I say, he's quite old now. He's not really got that many miles on the clock, but he is quite old. But that would be massive if he could beat him. Then he may as well pack it in, because there just wouldn't be anybody left for him to fight, really.
That is the problem, I think, after this year. If he goes in and fights 2 or 3 times like expected, you're looking at really kind of recycling some of the old names, or going, like you say, to fight like Beterbiev. Then what, are we going to ask him to move up and fight at cruiserweight just to challenge himself even more? But he does it, surprisingly. Unlike Terence Crawford, Canelo has his haters, even though he's daring to be great and going through all these weight divisions.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, that, isn't it? Because would you might not be wild about this Yildirim fight, and lots of people aren't, but it's in February, so it's not getting in the way of anything. It's just an extra fight that he wouldn't normally have, that he's just sticking in there. And I mean, maybe some other fighters will come through over the next 2 or 3 years that we don't really kind of know about yet, because I don't see Alvarez really wanting to stop doing this anytime soon. I mean, he's been boxing for half his life as a pro. He was 15, wasn't he, when he turned over? He's 30 now. He's had 50 plus fights, but he still looks really fresh. And he'll just want to keep doing it. We do just need some people to arrive who can really challenge him, because it just doesn't look like that third fight against Golovkin is going to happen. And although I would be really interested to watch it, I do think that their kind of paths of they're going in opposite directions, aren't they? Canelo's getting better and better still, and Golovkin is not far off 40. And I felt his pain in those first 2, because I thought he won the first one. Second one, really, really close, and no big issue with Canelo getting it. But I thought he really did win that first fight. But I think if they were to box a third time, I think Canelo would maybe win and put it on him a bit. And I don't really want to see that, because I love Golovkin. But yeah, we do need someone we need fighters capable of giving him a real fight. And I don't think there is anyone at super middleweight. I really don't.
Just clearing up, making all that money. So it's going to be interesting to see where he goes, especially in, I think 2022 is going to be the year that we're kind of scratching our brains, because I don't really think the Caleb Plant fight is too great. Charlo's, the Charlo, Benavidez, I think would probably do good. And then after that, he can really clutching at straws unless we have some breakout opponents like Balanga, someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's still first round knockouts for him, isn't it? Which is amazing, but you can't really tell much, can you? That's kind of the problem with that. He was quite vocal on Twitter, I think, wasn't he, saying that he would fancy it with Canelo, but I don't see his handlers being at all interested in that anytime soon. I mean, on the domestic front, I would really like to see Callum Johnson and Buatsi get up there and get a crack at world titles. Callum Johnson's had one already. He finds himself a little bit frozen out at the minute because Eddie Hearn and Joe Gallagher had a bit of a falling out off the back of a few things that Joe said. I'm sure that won't. I mean, it's probably over already, but I'm sure that's not going to hold Callum Johnson back too much. I certainly hope not. But it'd be good to see, Joe Smith fights Maxine Glassoff, doesn't he, for the WBO? And I'm not sure exactly where everybody is in the rankings. Not that it really matters. Things can be engineered, but I think those two I think those two have got it in them to get a world title, Buatsi and Johnson. And we've always been big Buatsi believers in the UK. He wasn't brilliant against Marko Calic, but he hadn't boxed for quite a long time. But I do genuinely believe that he's a kind of fighter who's going to get better every time he steps out there. And Okoli as well. You know, Okoli will get his shot against Glavatsky. That was a real shame that didn't happen on the AJ card, because he'd been waiting all year for it, and I think he would have won. But I think the delay will only increase his chances of winning. So I don't think it's going to hurt him too much. And Okoli's like, I've always had a lot of time for Okoli because I knew him quite well in the amateurs. Like, I don't really make it my business to get to know fighters particularly, but I just was in his company quite a lot, like in WSB and on a few trips and that. And he's very confident, but in exactly the right way, in that he doesn't feel like he knows everything. He's open to criticism. He doesn't take it personally. And he's been criticised a lot too, given what he's won and what he's managed to achieve. He keeps a level head and he just goes about his business. He doesn't pretend to be anything that he isn't, but the confidence is real, and he's got some personality. So it would be great to see him win a world title, because not many people would have picked him as the first person to do it out of those Rio Olympians. And there's no guarantees that any of the rest of them will do it, of course. You know, it's a difficult thing to do. He hasn't done it yet, but I genuinely do think he will.
Well, fingers crossed for a busier 2021 in terms of boxing worldwide.
Yeah. I mean, it is strange to think about it all now, isn't it? You know, thinking back to the start of the year, we hadn't had too many shows with Sky before it started, but we've been in Sheffield. Then we've been in Manchester. We'd had a golden contract. It wasn't our fight, but obviously there was Fury Wilder. There was big stuff going on, or momentum was picking up, because generally January's pretty quiet. I don't know what kind of strikes me strange about it now is just that I don't know what it was like with you, but just the level of pure denial here was when I look at it now was crazy, because you could see the pictures from Italy and France and all these other places, and we just seemed to think somehow that wasn't going to happen here. And I remember just thinking, as the days kind of ticked by and shows started to get cancelled, I remember just thinking, we all went to a press conference for Usyk Chisora, and that was like on Friday, like the 10th or something like that, 13th, 14th, something like that. And we were all kind of still in denial at that point that the boxing wasn't going to shut down for at least kind of like 3 or 4 months. And who were we kidding? I mean, it was, yeah. It's pretty impressive, I think, the way that the sport's managed to keep itself going and keep itself relevant, at least at the TV end. Of course, the big problem is small hall boxing is completely impossible until they get crowds, and not like 25% crowds either. It's impossible for small hall promoters until they're able to fill out a venue, and God knows when that will happen. I mean, you just wonder if without going too deep, you just wonder if things will ever quite be the same again, in any way. It's mind blowing.
I know it's kind of, fingers crossed that, in 2021, we kind of get back to a bit of normality, and at least we get to watch some boxing. We can't be ringside. There's obviously no fans in there, but at least we get to kind of, feed our want for the boxing, on TV, thanks to Top Rank, and UFC, and following the UFC and Matchroom. So at least we get to, follow it that way. Yeah.
And there's interesting things afoot with all of that too, because obviously DAZN have gone global, and they're looking to come to the UK market. Matchroom have got a decision to make. This is all like out there. It's all on record. I'm not going to get in trouble for this. But Matchroom have got a decision to make as to basically whether they re-sign with Sky, or whether they sign with DAZN, or whether they do a bit of a mixture. And if they manage to get Matchroom, which I think is definitely possible, it would take a lot of money on their part. But that's how any newcomer has to do it, isn't it? And it drives everybody else insane, because they think, oh, you're you're falsifying the market, you're blowing the market up, blah, blah, blah. But it's what you have to do. It's what Sky did 30 years ago when they were getting into sport. You know, they realised they had to get Premier League football. And I can't remember what happened, but they would have had to have broken the bank to get it. And they did. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens on that front. Because I think a lot of people thought that the pandemic might just squash the zone. But then when you look at the backers they've got and all the rest of it, that was never likely to be the case. But you just got more and more outlets showing boxing all the time now. Like Fight TV is another one that's emerged over here. Because with the international content, we got used to when Box Nation arrived, we got used to basically everything being watchable, everything. And then Box Nation doesn't really do that anymore. There's a pandemic, so Sky, you know, and BT the same, we've got to be careful about what they spend their money on in terms of international content. So Fight TV's been getting a lot of it. It's a weird sport to follow, isn't it? Because there is loads of it on, but it's in loads of different places. Yeah, I guess with you, it's ESPN, Fox, and DAZN. Yeah, we're Golden Boy. So yeah, we'll see. So that's quite an interesting one for me.
Yeah.
You can never kind of get too comfortable for too long. Something always happens.
Well, thanks for joining us, Andy, for the end of year review. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you have to head out in, I think, 20 minutes or so, you were saying. The floor is yours. Obviously, you can tell us where you can find you on, Instagram and Twitter and anything you have going, and whenever the next episode of Macklin's Take is. So yeah, that's we've taken a break from that for a bit. So yeah, I do a podcast with Matt Macklin, who I work at Sky with. You Fight fans will know. We're doing that for about 18 months, really. We started it February 2019, but it was kind of sort of middle of the year by the time we got to doing one a week. And we've really enjoyed that this year. That's been great because that's been some kind of semblance of normality. And Zoom was something I'd never heard of before the pandemic, but it increases your options. It means we can do this and the sound quality is good. Before that, we would always record it in person, which is definitely better. But at the same time, the last few weeks we had Robert Diaz on and Bob Arum, and we've been over to Al Bernstein and others, Nate Campbell, people who you will bump into, but rarely. And when you do, they're going to be really, really busy. So that's been great fun. Yeah, you can find that anywhere basically. Might have a few plans for that next year. And on Twitter, at Mr. Andy Clarke. I don't say an enormous amount, but I do like social media. I do think it definitely still. I still think the positives of it outweigh the negatives. If you're like me, luckily for me, I don't really, I never have taken anything particularly personally. If I don't know somebody, then I couldn't really care less what they say. I mean, it's you don't want to get too excited if someone you don't know is. Compliments are really nice and everything. But yeah, I feel I do have some colleagues who it tends to stick with them a bit if they get criticised on social media, and that I think that would be an unfortunate place to be, because I think it's just it's just down to how you are as a person, and luckily, and it is luck. I haven't got a problem with it, but it's just down to how you're wired, isn't it? And I don't think there's anything particularly you can do about it. But yeah, went off topic a little bit there. But a few days left to the year, and then we're into a new one. Any guests scheduled? So no, not at the minute. We've been doing a couple of things that during lockdown, or the first one, or in the middle of the year, we did a series called Make or Break, where basically you picked out fights in a fighter's career which were absolutely pivotal to their career. So not necessarily their biggest ones, but ones which, if they'd lost them, so maybe like mid-career or their first title fight, their career might have been completely different. So we got Josh Warrington, like these first two fights I mentioned, English title fight away from home, Commonwealth title fight away from home. It's not like he couldn't have recovered, but off the back of winning those two, Matchroom then started to make him their man in Leeds, and look what happened. So yeah, stuff like that. We spoke to Nate Campbell about his fight against Juan Diaz. That was ace. Like I did quite a lot of AIBA boxing commentary with him 2 or 3 years ago. No,
in 2016, mate. He'd be a great guest to get on. Like, I'll gladly share his details. He's really good fun. And we did this other thing called the Big Fight Deep Dive more recently, where you go into real detail about a particular big fight. And that's really good fun too, because, you know, if you have to like reread stuff and rewatch fights. And we had Tim May, who was the Columbus local newspaper reporter when Buster Douglas was fighting. So known him his whole life, basically, and was there in Tokyo. Just stuff like that. You know, we did Ben Eubank. So yeah, we'll probably hit on something else early in the year before the fights get going again. I mean, the access is great. You know, there's not really that many people. Macklin's got to get his Tyson Fury, and he can do it. I know he can do it. It's just a question of when, basically. So that'd be good. That'd be good. But we'll probably get going again, kind of like mid-January, I reckon.
Look forward to it. I listen every week, so I look forward to whoever you have on and all the different topics. But obviously, you can find us at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter, and obviously tune in next week. We'll give you the big fight review of Luke Campbell and Ryan Garcia, and whether I'm going to end up with egg on my face for kind of giving Ryan Garcia a hard time these last few weeks. But this is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.